today, most of my research focuses on enteric methane from cattle, so gas produced during normal ruminal fermentation. It's a topic that gets a little confused sometimes. We've actually researched it as an animal science community for, well over 100 years, because it's an energetic inefficiency in the fermentation process. But now most people think of it as, related strictly with climate change. Truly, it's a win-win proposition. If we can reduce that gas, we can improve the efficiency of production ideally, and then also reduce somewhat our environmental impact as well.
Welcome to the Beef Podcast, brought to you by Wisenetics. I'm your host, Brandy Buzzard, and it's my pleasure to bring you the latest trends and issues from the best and brightest minds in the beef industry. Today, we're joined by Dr. Logan Thompson, Assistant Professor and Extension Specialist at Kansas State University, focusing on sustainable livestock feeding. Dr. Thompson earned his master's in sustainable beef production and ruminant nutrition from Oklahoma State University and his PhD in ruminant nutrition and sustainability from Michigan State University. Furthermore, he completed his postdoctoral fellowship at Colorado State University before joining the K-State faculty in 2022. I always enjoyed having K-Staters on the show. That's wonderful for my little purple loving heart, especially when we can talk about sustainability in the beef production industry. So with that, let's dive right in. Dr. Thompson, welcome to the podcast. How are you today?
I'm doing good. Thanks for having me.
To start off with, though, for those of us who are not well familiar with your background, I know I read your bio a little bit, but that's just probably a drop in the bucket. If you could just bring us up to speed on your background, how you got started in the beef industry, and kind of your career thus far.
Yeah, so I'm originally from Central Texas. I grew up on a registered horned Hereford ranch. My dad was the cowhand on the ranch, hence why I'm at K-State and not back on a family operation. But that did instill a love of horned Herefords that I still carry to this day. So I tell everybody that means I just have a passion for treating pink eye. And I've had kind of a winding route to get here. So you mentioned a few of my stops, but I actually started my college career at a small university called Sam Houston State in the piney woods of East Texas. And that's actually where I developed my interest in pursuing a career in sustainable beef production. I remember very vividly driving to Huntsville from Llano, the town I'm from, and seeing a lot of these ranches that I used to help work calves on, or knew the ranch manager, et cetera, had become the greater Austin area. And that land use change really struck me as something that our industry was going to have to deal with. So I pivoted pretty early in my college career to pursue sustainable beef production. That's morphed into something entirely different now than land use change. But I try to remember that every day as like this is why I got interested in this space, is making sure ranches, working land stay working, right?
Yeah.
But today, most of my research focuses on enteric methane from cattle, so gas produced during normal ruminal fermentation. It's a topic that gets a little confused sometimes. We've actually researched it as an animal science community for, well over 100 years, because it's an energetic inefficiency in the fermentation process. But now most people think of it as, related strictly with climate change. Truly, it's a win-win proposition. If we can reduce that gas, we can improve the efficiency of production ideally, and then also reduce somewhat our environmental impact as well. So most of my work today occurs primarily in grazing systems. That is my personal preference. I love grazing systems. They're complicated, they're complex, and I don't fully understand them. So try to come up with management strategies that improve the efficiency of grazing, whether it's cow-calf or stock or backgrounder.
Are you tired of rolling the dice on calf scours? Get on the Pharmatan Clean Cow, Clean Calf program ahead of calving. Feed the cow, protect the calf. Pharmatan reduces severity of calf scours and is excellent to support milk production. By cleaning up the cow and boosting IgGs and colostrum, we have dramatically reduced calf losses over the last 9 years. Go to pharmatan.com for more details.
Well, if you are focusing on grazing strategies, you are in the right place, because Kansas State University, for our listeners who are unaware, is nestled right in the heart of the Konza Prairie, the last tall grass prairie. So the Flint Hills of Kansas. So you got a lot of grazing opportunity there around you to be doing research for sure.
I actually manage the stocker facility that's just east of the Konza Prairie on the Flint Hills. Yeah, called the Hylas Bay and Emma Browning Reynolds Flint Hill Prairie Preserve. So yeah, it's a really unique ecosystem, and it's something that we don't have a lot of anymore. So it's a really fun place to work.
Yeah, I did not know that. I knew that that stalker location was there. I didn't know that was the long name associated.
It is a mouthful, yes.
Yes, I did not know that. Was the tall grass, like the Konza Prairie and the Flint Hills, the tall grass prairie here, was that one of the reasons you wanted to come to K-State, or is that just a happy accident for you?
No, that was one of the reasons. And I almost came to school here, gosh, it would have been 10 or 12 years ago. I interviewed with a professor in the department who's still here, Dr. Casey Olson.
Yeah.
He took me on a tour of the Konza where he grazes some of the commercial cow-calf pairs that he runs for K-State. And I remember being just very struck by how unique of an ecosystem this is. And when I left Manhattan that day, I thought, I am coming to school in Manhattan, Kansas. And then I got a call from Oklahoma State to go work on winter wheat. And I thought that was a pretty unique production system as well. So I had a bit of a deviation there 10 or 12 years ago and ended up right back here. So it was always somewhere I wanted to come and work.
Well, we're glad to have you. I speak for all of Kansas State University Animal Science when I say we are glad to have you working in Manhattan on behalf of this very important research. You mentioned, and I can say that with some authorities, you mentioned the win-win situation. I love that. The win-win in terms of improving the efficiency for the cattle, but also improving outcomes and impact on climate from a beef sustainability viewpoint. I just love that. I'm definitely going to use that on LinkedIn and Instagram to promote this. So stay tuned for that. When it comes to measuring beef sustainability, and you were talking about, the emissions that you were working on, as someone who, I am not as entrenched in it as you are. I don't have advanced degrees focusing on sustainability and emissions, but I do have a great interest in it. And I talk about it a lot on social media, and I frequently go back to greenhouse gas emissions, GHGs, when talking about, having these conversations with consumers. But for you, are greenhouse gas emissions and carbon, are those the end all be all of conversations around sustainability? Or I imagine it's much more complex than that for you.
Yeah, so that is something that it's a great question, right? What is sustainability and how do GHG or greenhouse gases fit into this? We have somehow in the last 5 or 6 years, the space has morphed, drastically in the last half decade. Right. And now whenever sustainability is used, people just think carbon or greenhouse gases. Right. That is an aspect of sustainability. Right. But it's not the full story. Right. And we consider traditionally 3 pillars of sustainability. So environmental is one, but also social and economic. And you're a producer as well, right? If you're not economically viable, you're not sustainable, regardless of what your environmental impact is.
Absolutely.
If you're not making money, you're not staying in business. And then the social aspect as well is a very complicated one. So people typically think of consumers, right? Consumers wondering about environmental impacts or animal welfare. Concerns vary by generation to generation. But we also have rural economies that developed and are centered around beef production here in Kansas.
Absolutely.
Right? When beef production thrives, these rural towns do better. And when beef production is down, these towns do not do as well. Right. And they're already kind of going away in some respects anyway. Right. And so when it comes to having these conversations, it's, how do we support rural towns? how do we better improve our environmental impact, which most ranchers already consider themselves stewards of the land anyway, right?
Yes.
We're just looking at it from a slightly different lens now. And then, how do we keep these operations economically viable, and how do we also meet shifting consumer questions? Right? It's a very complex area, and one that we don't have, true solutions for, because a true solution likely doesn't exist. Right? We just want to get incrementally better every day.
I like that, getting incrementally better every day. I was having the point that you just made that there's no probably true solution. That's very important. I feel like when we go through life as we're growing older, when you're younger, you kind of think that life is black and white in so many ways, and this is a solution and it will do this. But so many things in life are complex and gray. And I remember having a conversation with my major professor, Dr. Lily Edwards Calloway, and Dr. Kim Stackhouse Lawson when we were at NCBA trade show event a couple years ago. We were talking about how yes, you can improve, problem A, but how does that affect this other system in the animal? Does that create problem B? And so there's a lot of tiny things that are interconnected that, you may not even know about till you get into this research. So I think that, I just want to kind of impart that upon our audience. That's really important, that there aren't easy solutions for things, and not every solution fixes more than it causes, I guess, in some instances. And you're going to have more examples of that than I do, but it's just a really important thing to remember about research.
Yeah, absolutely. One really good example of that from a greenhouse gas perspective is, methane produced in the rumen is largely driven by level of fiber in the diet and the amount that an animal eats, right? And with grazing animals, a forage that does a really good job of reducing methane production is alfalfa. It's a high quality forage, right? It's high protein. It's readily fermentable in the rumen, but again, it's high protein, and it will shift nitrogen deposition, right? It's also a legume, so it increases nitrous oxide flux from our soils, right? So there's a trade-off there. We might be reducing methane, but we might also be increasing nitrogen, volatilization or gas production, right? So it's a constant. The research in this field is a constant state of how much can I measure and how can I afford to do it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Is there any research that you're doing right now that you can share with us? That's not confidential or anything at the moment.
Yeah. So my research focuses on all three phases of production. So cow-calf, stalker, backgrounder, and finishing. We are wrapping up a cow-calf trial that is actually occurring in South Dakota this year. But it's one I started in Alabama probably 7 years ago now. I'm looking at grazing management, so continuous set stalking versus rotationally grazed, and its impacts on enteric methane emissions. And what we've seen in that project over the years is that geographies play an important role in what type of grazing system actually reduces enteric methane emissions, right? So the type of forage, the type of climate, the type of cattle, right? There's truly no, this grazing method is the best, at least with the data that we've collected, right? It's all variable based on local context, which I know is not an answer people want to hear, but it is the truth. There is no, singular best grazing method. And hopefully we'll have that wrapped up and have some K-State extension publications out next year on that.
Oh, wonderful.
And then from a feedlot perspective, I'm not a feedlot nutritionist, but I'm interested in very low cost or low barrier for entry feeding systems for producers, that may only finish a small percentage, small number of calves every year.
Yeah.
And so we've been looking at limit feeding, so feeding below ad libitum, below how much an animal wants to eat, and then how can we manipulate that over time to create some advantages in growth behavior of the animals. And what we've seen is by limit feeding to around 94 to 96%, We can reduce enteric methane emissions. We also improve feed efficiency. And we can, by turning animals loose at the end of the finishing period, so usually like 35, 40-ish days, we can reach a carcass size that's the same as if they were fed ad libitum the entire period. The only downside we're seeing so far is a small reduction in marbling. We just shipped some cattle not long ago to try to, on a project to overcome some of that marbling disadvantage, where we restricted animals from about day 35 on feed to day 80, and then turned them loose. They were ad lib restricted and then turned loose again. We haven't ran the stats on it yet, but it appears that may have allowed us to overcome some of the marbling issues we were having. They appeared to grade about the same.
Oh, wonderful.
So still need to clean that data up. And it was beef heifers, so they're easier for universities to get a hold of now. Heifers they're pretty ubiquitous in the fed cattle supply at the moment. So it was not a beef steer, right? But we did see some of that marbling return in those animals rather than them being restricted for 120 days.
So that's just during the feeding period. So it is not related to like how they were, if they were gray, what they were eating or how much they were fed during that stalker phase, and just related to when they came into the feedlot there for the finishing period. And the first 30 days they were, not ad lib, or they were not limit fed. And then you said the middle phase there for about 50 days, they were limit fed and then turned limit off there at the end. And that kind of kept the marbling intact, you think?
Yeah. The thought being that a lot of the marbling might occur early in the finishing period, right? When they're at 1,000 to 1,100 pounds, that might be when we're actually getting a lot of that marbling deposition and not, just developing trim fat. That's why we structured it that way. I'm sure there might be some disadvantages we haven't seen yet, but it was pretty promising that those girls graded the same regardless of how they were fed.
That's very interesting. We finish probably 40 head a year of our own. So I'm going to talk to the head nutritionist here, AKA my husband, about that. I'll be very interested to see that research when you guys have it, completed, because you understand every penny counts. So even when the market is high like this and pennies are easier to find, every penny still counts. So
yeah, and that's actually the biggest benefit we see with limit feeding is your feed cost is going to be so much lower, right, than it would have otherwise been. And they're a little bit more hungry, so identifying sick animals. And Dr. Blasi here on the backgrounder side has observed some of that, right? When they're willing to come up to the bunk when they hear the truck, it's a little bit easier to identify some morbidity issues as well in those pens. Yeah.
Does it matter what they were, in your opinion, based on the research you've seen so far, does it matter what you're feeding them in terms of like that marbling and that fat deposition? So we're feeding a lot of silage from now through, oh my gosh, we'll probably be feeding silage at the end of May, to be completely honest. We had a good year. But how does that relate, you think, to the feeding?
Yeah, so that's going to change the energy density of your diet, right, which you need to be cognizant of. Because fat deposition takes energy, right? And we had a good year too. We put up, stock unit put up high moisture corn. We put up a lot of silage here at K-State this year. So it was a good year for that. But yeah, in general, if you're increasing silage, right, you're going to have more fiber in the diet than if you were feeding a steam flake corn-based ration. But our rations here were a little bit lower on the energy availability because we're feeding mostly dry rolled corn in our finished calves.
So there's a difference there. We do top dress it with DDGs based on how much silage you're getting and how many in there. So, but that's still very good insight. And so like I said, I look forward to seeing that when that's ready for the general public. To pull back more for me, I got us off on a tangent. To pull us back to the sustainability, like emissions kind of focused topic. I did not know much about this, so I would love for you to explain it. But what is global warming potential? And kind of what is its role, or what is it for those of us who are not up to date on that?
Yeah. So whenever you see like in the New York Times or whatever magazine you subscribe to, if you still subscribe to magazines, it's going to put the beef cattle environmental impact on you know like 20. It might say like 22 kilograms per uh, uh, or 22 pounds per pound of finished product, right? And that 22 is going to reflect GWP 100 emissions. So GWP 100 is global warming potential on a 100-year timescale.
Okay.
It is not, in fact, a warming potential at all. Right? It's a bit of a misnomer. It's an energy trapping potential of different greenhouse gases. And it's a way of relating greenhouse gases all back to the same reference value, which is traditionally carbon dioxide. So it's a CO2 equivalent basis. And that's how all, the U.S. greenhouse gas inventory from the EPA that still exists, it's all on that basis. Every country, every organization uses it. The issue we have as a beef industry is that we do not emit carbon dioxide as our primary greenhouse gas. Right?
Okay.
Carbon dioxide is a long-lived gas pollutant. Think of it as effectively being in the atmosphere until it's not, until something removes it. Right? It has a very long residence time in the thousands of years in the atmosphere once it's emitted. We primarily emit methane. Right? It's a short-lived gas pollutant. It's gone after 10 to 12 years. Right? It's broken down into CO2 and water vapor. Right? And then it's again available as part of the natural carbon cycle. Right? That ruminants exist as a part of. But the GWP 100 as our basis does not aptly capture that atmospheric behavior of methane, right? Which both over and under estimates our warming impact, right? And it's something that myself at K-State, you mentioned Kim Stackhouse-Lawson at CSU, and others are all working on is how can we more aptly quantify our warming impact as a beef industry so that if we're going to be judged by some outside entity, whoever that may be, they're going to have the correct values, right? And my personal opinion is we're not really putting ourselves on a fair footing, if that makes sense.
Right. No, that makes sense. If we're going to be judged, we want to be judged using the same measurements. Is that impact today any different than historic emissions?
Yeah, so there's been a couple publications over the past 15 or so years. Because I get this question a lot from producers, right? Is grazing or is beef cattle production today different than bison, right? And there is a professor at Penn State, Dr. Alexander Hristoff, who did some research published in 2012 looking at bison versus beef production in the United States. And so pre-European settlement bison populations, which the populations are hard to know. They were anywhere from 20 million to 100 million, depending on which resource you look at. And what he found was using kind of like just a midpoint estimate, I think it was 50 million bison. U.S. beef production today was pretty similar to historic levels in terms of greenhouse gases. And then my research group here at K-State as well, I was more interested in the localized context for that question because the Flint Hills, I mean, we were grazed by bison, right? Migratory bison. And since we have so many years of stalker data, which is our primary production system, we looked at historic bison grazing, modern bison grazing, stalker production, and cow-calf production on a per unit land basis, just to figure out, we're generating more emissions per unit land today than the historic bison numbers were, and all localized to the Flint Hills of Kansas. And what we found was stalker production, especially intensively early stocked, where you stock at 250 pounds an acre for half the time, were pretty comparable to historic bison, especially when you consider the error rate that probably exists within that measurement, right? So, I think we can feel pretty confident that, at least from an enteric methane standpoint, we're probably not all that different than what was occurring here before us, which, again, is positive. That's not to say we don't have issues environmentally. It just might, in my opinion, it might be that we're chasing one thing, being methane, when we maybe should refocus on some other areas of need.
Okay. And what areas would you like for us to refocus on?
My big one is manure.
Okay.
Manure and nitrogen. I think if you view beef cattle production as just this, just this massive web of natural cycles, and you just think, which natural cycle have we actually broken?
Mm-hmm.
Nitrogen to me is that cycle, right? We're generating a lot more nitrogen for fertilizer today than we ever have historically.
Right. Yeah.
And we're generating large amounts of manure in very confined areas, and we're having issues getting rid of that manure effectively, right? There's a lot of field, you're a couple hours south of Manhattan, Kansas. There's a lot of fields there that do not need more phosphorus in those fields.
Right. Yeah.
Right. But we're not going to pay to ship manure 4 hours away. So how can we manage manure in a way that's going to return more nutrients to the soil, right? And hopefully reduce our demands on exogenous nitrogen, because that is a pretty nasty compound. It causes water quality issues. It hurts aquatic ecosystems, causes red tides right in the Gulf of Mexico. There's a host of issues with nitrogen that I think we really need to focus in on. And I don't think that's really that big of a secret within the cattle industry. When I go out to feedlots in Western Kansas and I ask them, hey, what are your issues? They go, manure, right? Managing it, getting rid of it, all of the things that exist with it, right? That's a common issue.
Yeah, for sure. But I would say that it's not something that you hear, not you specifically, but like I hear talked about a lot. I have not heard nitrogen is not something I hear people talking about a lot when it comes to, their top 5 issues or something that they're dealing with in their beef production. I guess it's not as the forefront as I would think it would be based on what you just shared about like red tides and the aquatic life and things like that, which are all very, very important concerns. I'm just surprised that it's not mentioned more based on the importance that you shared about it. So that's just interesting for me. I'm in the wrong circles, I guess, or I'm not asking the right questions of people is what's happening.
Well, there's not a lot of people that are out there talking about it. And again, producers, like, why would nitrogen be an immediate concern for a producer, mm-hmm. right? I mean, it's not going to be. When you phrase it as manure and manure management, all of a sudden it's like, well, yes, that is an issue. You know, all my neighbors' fields are high in phosphorus. They don't need this carbon nitrogen ratio there. Like, I don't know how to get rid of it. I'm calling everybody I know and their cousin, right, to see if they want to pick up load, which happens, right?
Yeah.
And so from that standpoint, they realize it's an issue, but they don't tie it into nitrogen per se.
That makes sense when you phrase it that way. I appreciate you clearing that up for me, because it's very much an issue, but when I hear people at the coffee shop, they're not like, I got to get rid of this manure. I got to handle this nitrogen issue. So that's a much more, it's an easier way for me to understand it. So I appreciate you clearing that up. When it comes to beef sustainability and your research, what are 1 or 2 things that you wish like the general beef community, like I'm going to say beef community, but like producer community understood better?
Yeah. One thing I like to bring up is this is not a new challenge that we have, right? Sustainability or environmental impact, this is not a new challenge. Consumers have always, in the last 40 years, definitely, questioned things about the industry, right? Historically, that's been animal welfare, right? And we still see that today. There's still animal welfare concerns that exist. With the new generation of consumers, they're just asking a different set of questions, right? So really, this feedback mechanism is not any different. They're just asking slightly different questions today. I also view that as a positive. When we have consumers, say like Kansas City Metro, that are probably 3 or 4 generations removed from a rural lifestyle, and now they're asking how their beef is being produced the previous generation may not have asked that, right? I think it's a good thing that people are asking how their food is being produced, right? And I think a lot of benefits can occur from that, right? And I think it also gives us an opportunity to tell our story. And I think that's the biggest win we could have as an industry is through this whole process, get out there through platforms like this one, right? And say, this is beef production and this is how we do it and this is why we do it, right? And create a more direct line of communication with consumers that maybe we didn't have in the 80s and 90s.
Oh, for sure, right? Yeah, for sure.
And then I also like to remind people, because everybody, I've already mentioned it once in this podcast, every cow-calf stocker producer, anybody who's grazing based, if you ask them, are you a steward of the land? They all say yes, right? And this is the same thing, right? We just want to continue to find new and better ways to manage our landscapes to keep them healthy and thriving and ready to transition to the next generation when that transition occurs. Right? We already self-identify as stewards anyway. So I just like to remind folks that there might be people asking about methane, but the center of this is just landscape stewardship.
I love that. We are on the same page as stewards of the land. Do you have any advice or advice for ranchers as a sustainable beef specialist that would make your life easier from a research standpoint or anything like that in terms of them putting things into practice on a ranch, maybe?
One thing, we talk about this a lot. I was on a conference call last week that was dedicated to nothing but this, is weigh your cows.
Oh.
Know how much your cows weigh.
Yeah.
Normally they're 250 pounds heavier than you think they are. Right? And that has impacts on our stocking rate and carrying capacity. And the amount of cows, I've been very fortunate to work with producers across the whole country. They're all wonderful. They're all more progressive, I think, than consumers give them credit for, right? They all ask really intuitive questions. And like 90% of them tell me they have 1,100 or 1,000 pound cows, right? And you look at the size of their hooves and you go, I don't think that's true. But you're being, very generous with your time today. So I don't want to insult you, but, investing in a pair of scales or just being cognizant of your cold cow sales records, how old the cow was, what her body condition score was when you sold her, because you're probably not sending a prime 5-year-old to the market, right? You're probably sending a smooth mouthed cow that didn't toss a calf last year. So being cognizant of that so you can adjust weights accordingly will help you improve your grazing management and also your hay resources. When we think of what makes a cow-calf producer profitable, it's how they utilize their supplemental feed resources, how much they have to lean on them. And if you know how much your cows weigh on average, you can be a little bit better about sourcing that supplemental feed.
Absolutely. That is a very simple piece of advice, but one that has large implications. So I admittedly am very bad at eyeballing a cow, our cows, even calves. I rope a lot and I'm really bad at being like, oh, that calf weighs 300 pounds. I'm horrible at it. We do weigh our cows on a regular basis.
Yeah, and that's what it takes really, is just to put weights with a reading on it, put weights with what you're seeing visually. I wouldn't know myself if I didn't have to do it, usually once a week my group is weighing something, right? So just the repetition gets you better. Yeah.
Yeah, I can look at one and say, oh, she's big, but I can't tell you. I can't tell you. If we have had in the past, we had a wonderful donor cow that we bought out of a sale in North Dakota, and she was wonderful. We flushed her, have lots of embryos from her, and or lots of now a lot of cows in the herd that were embryos from her, and she was big. She was every bit of 1,800. I'm glad that I could look at her and say, that cow, definitely really big. So I can tell the big end and the small end. It's the middle I'm not so good at guesstimating at, but we do weigh on I would say relatively regular basis. So that's a wonderful piece of advice that probably goes overlooked by more people than we think. I love that. Where do you see the beef industry moving in the next 10 years in terms of sustainability research, improvements, things like that, aside from people weighing their cows more often?
Well, we're at a very unique juncture as an industry. And I say that because of a few different things. One is we have an increasing amount of our fed cattle supply coming from dairy beef crosses, which is a different animal that we're not fully used to, and we don't fully understand all the challenges with those creatures. We also have a smaller cow herd than we've had historically, and we're not really seeing signs of expansion at the moment. And we also have over the next 10 years, we're going to have a large transition in terms of who's running cattle in the United States. Right? Just looking at the age of operators on average, I think it by and large gets higher by 1 year every year. So I think we're going to have an increased reliance from a research standpoint and a producer standpoint on how can we utilize data to improve our decision making on the farm, because it's so costly to get into the industry today that we need all the tools that we can in order to turn a profit. And I think those tools are going to be dependent on the quality of data we can generate in a cost-effective manner to improve our decision-making process. Right? Whether that's use of satellite imagery and an app-based platform, or use of new genetic selection indexes. Right? We're going to we need to understand how much data we can collect, how easily we can collect it, and how we can get it at the fingertips of producers so that they can make better decisions. Because that's what it's gonna take, I think, in the future.
Yeah, that's interesting. I just thought of something, a new tool that's happening that directly is very related to your work. Virtual fencing has obviously become very big recently. Have you done any work with that? What's your opinion of it in terms of a grazing management tool? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so as part of our work at the Reynolds Ranch south of Manhattan, there will be some stalker cattle with GPS collars on them next year. I think it's got a lot of potential for sure. I think there needs to be improved granularity on how sensitive those collars are to the fence lines that you design on the platform. Because I know some of them, like when I picture, like Southeast Kansas, that's more fescue belt, and our pasture sizes are small.
That's where
and
I live.
The sensitivity, I'm aware, the sensitivity of those collars isn't maybe the best in that region. But I think there's potential, in more extensive production systems like Western Kansas, where our pasture sizes are larger, to manipulate where animals are in the pasture, based on whatever time you decide. So there's a lot of meat on the bone. There is some upfront infrastructure cost associated with virtual fencing, installing towers and getting collars. But then again, there's upfront infrastructure on fencing, right? So I think we need, and we'll continue as a beef community to do research on what that trade-off is, and is it worthwhile, right? And in what context is it worthwhile? Because I know there's some producers that really thrive with it, and there's others that have trialed it for a couple of years and said, I'm done. So we just need to get a better understanding of who it fits.
For sure. Definitely has some, I would imagine, some based on where you are geographically, has different benefits and drawbacks for sure. So there's a lot of, I live in fescue country, but there's a lot of trees here in our pastures, and setting up, I can imagine we don't have virtual fencing. I would love to try a system or try one out and see how that works for us, but definitely have to account for trees and things like that. And where I know some of them are based on data plans or a Wi-Fi signal or something like that. And where some of our cows are, that's not. I don't want to rely on a Wi-Fi signal based fence to keep my cows in some areas for sure. So that was not something I had planned to talk to you about today, but you were speaking about technology and grazing, and I thought that was very apropos.
It's time for our famous three.
Boehringer Ingelheim puts cattle first. They deliver cutting-edge vaccines, parasiticides, and supplements to help keep cattle healthy and productive. From supporting fresh cows with bovical calcium boluses to protecting your herd with pyramid vaccines, Boehringer stands with veterinarians and producers every step of the way. Put cattle first on your operation. Learn more at bianimalhealth.com/cattle.
To our audience, if you're enjoying this episode of the Beef Podcast presented by Wisenetics, please remember to like and subscribe and share it with your friends and family. We have arrived at the part of our show where I have the same questions for every guest. And so I gave Dr. Thompson a head up on these. But the first is, what is your favorite beef or cattle-related resource? Could be a book, a person, a website, anything.
Yeah, so my favorite resource, and this is very telling of what I do for a living, is a book called Nutritional Ecology of Ruminants by Dr. Van Soest. I reference it all the time, whether it's for teaching classes or working with grad students. It's a great breakdown of how we got here with ruminants, how they evolved, and then how do we measure different aspects of their production. So that, to me, is probably my favorite resource and one I rely on quite a bit.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, the next question is, what is your favorite non-beef or cattle-related book or one that you are currently reading?
Yeah, so maybe in line with my thinking or my preference for grazing systems, but there's a book I actually give my PhD students when I think that they're too pro status quo. It's called The Myth of Progress. It's written by a biologist from the University of Maine, I believe, but it's just a very good book that challenges your thinking on, our current current economic system and how we got to where we are in terms of landscape or land utilization. So I got that from an old dairy professor at Michigan State University, and I still look at it to this day and have a lot of students read it as well.
I'm looking it up right now on Amazon to read more about it. I love hearing what other people are reading and what they find interesting and things like that. So The Myth of Progress Toward a Sustainable Future. Okay, I have to read the excerpt on that one for sure. And then lastly, when you think of someone you admire or look up to, what is a characteristic they possess that has led them to be successful?
Yeah, so the characteristic I find a common through line with successful people is they seem to have an endless amount of hours in a day. And I don't know if that's through just sheer enthusiasm or efficiency of work, but some of the people I look up to the most, I just leave, the conversation scratching my head going, where did you find the time to do all this? And it's probably a combination of all those things, right? They're enthusiastic about what they do, and they're very efficient with their time. But something I always find holds true is those who get the most, those who are at the highest levels of their field typically appear to have 30 hours in a day, where the rest of us have 24. Probably
when you're that passionate about something, you make, you move more efficient with your time, like you said, to make it happen so you can do more. But I have never had someone answer that question with that characteristic. And I love that. That's wonderful. I'm like, that answer inspired me just by you saying it. So good job. Well, Dr. Thompson, I could sit here, because I live close to K-State, don't be surprised if I come knocking on your door one day wanting to talk more about all this. But for the sake of our audience and our episode, that is all the questions and time we have for today. I have so thoroughly enjoyed talking to you and learning from you about your work and about what the state of beef sustainability is today in the beef industry. If listeners have questions for you or want to learn more about our discussion today or your work, where can they do that?
Yeah, they can find my contact information at K-State Department of Animal Science and Industry page, or look up K-State Reynolds Ranch on Google, and it'll pop up with our facilities and my email contact information on there. And yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out.
So you heard that. For those of you on the viewing this on your mobile device or on your desktop, however you choose to listen, we will put Dr. Thompson's information in the footnotes for you to go look up. Thank you again to our guests for being here. Thank you, Dr. Thompson, for sharing your time and knowledge with us. And to our audience, thank you for tuning in. And we will meet you back here next week on the Beef Podcast presented by Wisenetics.